So this is a really, really important project, FHWA and NHTSA. As Paul mentioned, it's going to be me kind of taking the lead, and I'll be wrapping things up. And in the middle, it's going to be Alejandro and Bob Krile, and who are going to be describing a lot of the technical activities. We recognize that we presented this information in September when we weren't yet complete with the analysis, and we're really digging as deep as we possibly can into the numbers and whatnot, and trying to look and see what's what. And we're going to be presenting the latest and greatest a little bit later on today. And recognizing that not everybody was in the September Talking Tim, but also recognizing that you guys are very well aware of what's going on with Move Over. We're going to summarize the high level stuff that we think that everybody should know or likely knows. You'll have a copy of our slides through the NOCO deck, and then we'll highlight our findings. So with that, we wanted to just talk a little bit about the motivation of this project. It's called the Responder and Other Roadside Worker Safety Research Project. As you know, all 50 states have got this law in place, and it requires that people either slow down or move over when approaching emergency vehicles. The purpose is to reduce the likelihood of responders being struck while working, or the work zone workers from working, from being struck. And it's really, really important. I think as recently as Valentine's week, we learned of a law enforcement officer in Ohio who was out collecting debris, trying to get it out of the roadway, and was struck, sent to the hospital. It's incredibly serious injury. There was a huge show of support at the hospital while he was in there being treated too. He survived, of course, but there's still, even though we've got the 0 for the last month and a half, it's still a very, very important project to be looking into and completely wrapping our arms around it. So the way that this started was, this is something that was requested by NHTSA, by Congress, requested that NHTSA take a look at this. They teamed up with Federal Highway Administration, and we did this first of its kind comprehensive data-driven assessment of policies, practices, the laws, as much information as we possibly can get to. The project purpose and methodology, you're going to hear a little bit more about it, and then we're going to move into the findings. So we were tasked with understanding move over laws, compliance, and technology-based worker safety messages, investigating driver compliance to the move over law, doing a technology assessment or countermeasures assessment, and eventually sharing the results with Congress. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alejandro, who's going to lead our discussion through the technical portion. So I'm going to go on mute, and Alejandro, turning it to you.
Thanks, Martha. So yeah, I'm going to give a quick overview of the methodology that we followed in this project, along with the results that we found on understanding the state of the practice and the rest of the tasks that we did for the project. So this was a multi-stage effort that involved multiple literature reviews and data collection activities. This allowed us to ensure that we have the most up-to-date information about the state of the practice, and also the techniques and technologies that are being used to increase safety. Then after this, an observational study was done to better understand the move over law compliance. And at the same time, we did agency interviews and additional lead reviews to identify and understand the technologies that are being developed and geared towards the increase of safety of roadside workers and incident responders. And then we conducted a nationwide audit to better understand what is actually being used by agencies and what are the benefits and challenges of using these technologies, and also to collect real world data. Martha, can you go to the next slide, please? So there's a summary of the state of the practice. The lead review showed that driver distractions, lack of awareness of the legislation, and also driver fatigue and substance abuse negatively influence compliance with the move over law. The lead review also showed that high visibility garments and equipment, the presence of law enforcement vehicles, and these vehicles flashing their red and blues, and signs indicating monetary fines and jail time and also signs that literally say move over, slow down, or move over is the law. Those are factors that have shown to increase move over compliance. The lead review also showed that variations of the law from state to state may confuse a driver as he's approaching an incident scene or a roadside work. And also the information that we reviewed show that large numbers of fatalities and serious injuries for work zone workers occur during the day and in non-peak hours. So overall, the statistics suggest that struck by crashes tend to occur in daylight and in clear weather predominantly. So following this analysis, we decided to perform an observational study, data collection to better understand driver compliance in real world settings. And my colleague, Bob Krile, will present this information. Bob.
Thank you, Alejandro. So as part of this project, we did an observational study between the time periods of February 2021 and May 2022, using live incident scene videos from transportation organizations who contributed to this effort across 8 different states. The total amount of data collected was 72 incidents that we were able to process. There was considerably more than that were contributed initially, but they had to be processed in a way that you'd be able to identify the move over compliance. There's ultimately 14 hours of video, 32,000 vehicles that went through this analysis. The video itself is processed for each of the incidents through an automated object detection and tracking algorithm, which we call ODT, which is developed by the University of Maryland's CAT Lab. And then as part of that processing, we're able to identify of all the vehicles that go through these incident scenes, which ones of them would be subject to move over law by their positioning relative to the vehicles on the side of the road. And then whether or not those vehicles did move over or slowed down by at least 20%. We used, as our primary measure, we used a single evaluation factor, which is the laws vary a little bit from state to state, but that would be generally consistent with all the laws in all the states. And then we also looked at just move over compliance alone. So the next slide here is a video that you can actually see the ODT algorithm being used on an incident scene, where it's identifying individual vehicles as they enter the scene and traverse through the scene, and then digitizing that information. Once we have that, the algorithm itself is able to identify whether those vehicles were in compliance with move over and or whether they were subject to moving over. So this was the underlying technology that was used to come up with the statistics that we're going to analyze next. Once we had the information for individual vehicles of these from these videos, we fit statistical models to the factors associated with the vehicles and the videos themselves to try to identify whether there's factors that were predictive of overall move over compliance. Some of those key factors included differentiation between cars and trucks, looking at different roadway locations, different incident types, the responder vehicles that were on scene depending on the specific video, and some other factors associated with the incident scene, like the traffic flow rate or the time of day and day of week. The first major objective of this was just to get some idea of what move over compliance it looks like right now. And the overall statistic for the entire study was about 48% compliance of all those vehicles that are subject to move over, doing so either by moving over or by reducing their speed 20%. So 48% is sort of the takeaway big number of how good is move over compliance sort of nationwide. We did see significant differences between truck and car compliance. Trucks were about 6 to 7% higher compliance level than cars. And then we also looked at the statistic using just move over as a compliance. To meet the compliance, those statistics are lower, of course. because you're not able to meet compliance by reducing speed. But we did see the same pattern as far as the just moving over alone. Trucks are more likely to do so than cars. The other significant finding on these first set of factors is that if you take an incident scene with a safety service patrol vehicle and then you compare it to another scene that also adds a police presence, that you find that the police presence, in addition to any safety service patrol vehicles, tends to lead to higher compliance. We quantified it at about 8.5%. We looked at a couple of continuous factors to try to better understand compliance. This particular plot shows the relationship between compliance and vehicle flow rate through the incident scenes. What we found in this analysis is that there's a small but persistent relationship that as traffic flow rates increase, the compliance rates decrease. And we'll also look at this shortly with respect to density in addition to flow rate. And another important finding, we looked at time of day, and as Alejandro mentioned about the times of day where individuals are most vulnerable, we did find some relationship here with the highest levels of move over compliance occurring in the morning hours up to about noon. And then we got lower average compliance. There's quite a bit of noise in the data, but we got lower compliance in the afternoon hours. And then if you look all the way out on the right side of the plot, there's very little data after about 5 or 6 p.m. and only a couple of nighttime incidents because of the challenges of having video where you can actually look at, be able to classify move over appropriately. We did find some factors that didn't show any significant correlation. That doesn't mean there isn't any, but just we didn't see that in the data. Rural versus urban roadways, disabled versus crash scenes. And then the movement direction, whether individuals were required to move to the left or move to the right. Those did not show significant relationships. There were a couple other factors like weather. Most of the videos were in clear weather. And some of the scene characteristics that we might have been interested in evaluating if they were available. They just weren't. There wasn't enough diversity in the videos that we had. So, for instance, fire or EMS presence, we were not able to evaluate separately whether or not that related to higher compliance. And then finally, what's important about this overall study is that this is not the 48% I stated at the beginning is not truly a nationally representative number of move over compliance, because we didn't do this through a rigorous process of sampling across the whole country and using all types of roadways. But nevertheless, it is the first of its kind evaluation that's cross-state and includes a significant number and diversity of locations. So the result itself is meaningful, if maybe not necessarily exactly representative. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. So I'm gonna take over and talk a little bit about the roadside safety technology assessment. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the goal for this task was to identify current and emerging technologies that are being used to improve roadside worker and incident responder safety, and what is the effectiveness of these technologies. So first, we conducted a market scan, which involved talking to DOT representatives and technology manufacturers. And these allow us to create a list of technologies, A literature review was then done to identify studies that investigated the effectiveness of these technologies. And this review allows us to determine what are the best practices for measuring the effectiveness and evaluate safety technologies. Then after this, a technology audit was performed to better understand what is really being used by state organizations and for what activities these technologies are being used. So if they're being used for work zones or for incident management, and the duration of deployment for these technologies. To do this, a checklist was sent to all 52 FHWA division offices, and we also conducted follow-up interviews with state agencies. Next slide, please. So the results of the lead review and the market scan identify the following technologies as the ones that have better potential to improve safety. Positive protection devices, they do have a high up front cost, but have demonstrated high safety performance. Flares of all varieties, these are low cost and provide the driver with advanced notice of where a scene is located. Sequential flashing warning lights, these are low cost and are used for incident scenes and work zones. And some of these devices incorporate a wireless communication technology that allows synchronization. Also connected traffic cones. So these devices can communicate with navigation applications and traffic management centers, providing real-time location of a scene to a driver. Wearable lighting systems. These are low cost and can be worn on several parts of the body, which increase responder visibility. Connected wearable devices. This particular one was a vest or a garment that can be worn by incident responders or workside roadside workers, and the vest can communicate to TMCs and navigation apps, which provides the location of the worker. One major finding was that most of the research on these technologies is geared towards work zones, and there's very little information regarding incident management. Also, with the exception of the positive protecting devices that we mentioned earlier, these technologies require minimal additional equipment. They're all small form factor, and they do not interfere with the duties of the worker. Can we go to the next slide, please? So regarding the nationwide audit that we perform, we sent out the technology checklist to all the FHWA field offices, and we receive responses from 27 jurisdictions. Here in the map, we don't show Puerto Rico, but we want to mention that they also responded to the checklist. Next slide. So here are a couple of examples of the data that we collected through this checklist. The information we received was tabulated and was presented in the form of bar charts to better understand the number of agencies using the technology and whether if this technology is being used for long-term versus short-term deployments, and if it's being used for traffic incidents or work zones. The graphs shown here show the results related to connected device technologies and their use for work zones versus traffic incident management, and also wearable roadside worker and responder protection, and they're used for long-term versus short-term deployments. There's a link, and I think it's going to be shared in the chat. So the full results can be found in the link. You'll see all the graphics and all the results. So next, these are some examples of technologies that we discussed with agencies. The first one is from the city of Carlton, Texas, Fire Rescue Department. This department requested the vendor of the mobile barriers to design a version of the barriers that specifically designed for incident management. So what they require was a 45-foot-long barrier that's equipped with 2 parallel steel wall sections. Now, if you compare this to the ones that are used for work zone, the configuration is different. This one has 2 parallel walls instead of being in an angle. They also requested to have a rotating truck-mounted attenuator, an aero board, and then on top of it, a 3,000-gallon water tank that has connectors on both sides to supply water to fire engines. So the unit serves as a protective barrier for the incident responders, as well as to provide water for fire engines. So they requested this to replace the use of the fire trucks when trying to block a scene. So after just 2 weeks of being in service, this barrier was struck by a distracted driver. And so this saved lives of the responders and prevented a major incident. So the city of Texas did not do the city of Carlton did not do an official cost benefit analysis, but they calculated that it's more cost effective to invest in one of these barriers as opposed to the high expenses that it takes to repair one of the fire engines after it's being hit by a vehicle. Next slide. So the Illinois State Police, District 15, is currently using a programmable system to customize the lighting arrangement across vehicles. Different modes of flashing patterns can be programmed into this system, depending on the vehicle dynamics and the performance, such as if the vehicle is moving versus if the vehicle is stationary, if the turn light is on, if the brake lights are engaged, if the door is open, if the system is being used during the day or during the night. During our conversation, 150 units have been deployed. The ability to synchronize the lighting across multiple vehicles was being planned. So a few examples of the features of the technology is that, for instance, the lower light intensity when the vehicle is stationary or parked has been reported to reduce glare effect on the officer when stepping in and out of the vehicle, and also provides a less light crowded scene. So when a vehicle is approaching the scene, it doesn't get blindsided by the high beams of the flashing lights. The system also reduces the intensity of the rear flashing warning lights when the vehicle's brakes are engaged. So this has been reported to reduce brake light washout by motorists that are behind the patrol. And anecdotal evidence suggests that move over compliance has improved with this new lighting solution. And next slide. So after initially piloting the use of a snowplow to provide debris removal functionality, the Missouri Department of Transportation developed its own system as part of an internal innovation challenge. And they created this device called JAWS, it's shorthanded for Julie's Automatic Waste Removal System. This system is controlled from inside one of these Missouri Department of Transportation vehicles, and they lower it to the roadway surface at slow speeds. The device is made of polycarbonate material and includes cameras for viewing from inside of the vehicle. When we conducted our interviews, they had 10 vehicles equipped with this system, with approximately 6 to 8 deployed daily. And so allowing the responder to remain inside of the vehicle substantially increases the safety of the responder. And one more thing is that this system has been adopted by several states and also by agencies in the country in Mexico. Next slide. So the results from the checklist responses and the follow-up interviews that we had show that the use of novel technologies such as connected vehicle transponders, wearable lighting, and mobile barriers is very low among agencies. The challenge that we learned here is that the cost of implementation of these technologies is high, which includes the acquisition, the deployment, and maintenance. And a common response was that funding is not often available to invest in these systems. The technologies with real-time communication to motorists demonstrate improved motorist behavior. Enhanced lighting systems by personnel and vehicles improve motorist awareness. Synchronized lighting in particular shows the potential to provide a more effective visual communication to motorists. And technologies such as the JAWS that we saw and automated barrel, rumble strip deployment and removal devices reduces the time that responders are physically on the road, which increases their safety. And the use of large fortified mobile barriers increase responder protection and also increases the performance of the responders since they feel safer behind these barriers. But again, the use of these technologies is very low. So Martha, I send it to you.
Right. Yep. Just want to go over findings and next steps. I want to try and shorten this up as well. You've heard some of the findings already. The move over laws, they vary state to state. There's several factors that influence move over law compliance, some of them positively, some of them negatively. The observational safety study, Bob did a great job of presenting that information. It was not a nationally representative study, but we were able to come to some findings for the information that we had available. Some of the driver measures were considered, and some of the factors that we were looking into didn't show significant correlation. And as we continue to do a deep dive into this information before we finalize our efforts, we're going to continue to dig and see what else we can find out. Alejandro just went over what the different, the summary was for the technology assessment. So I don't want to repeat any of that, but I'll just leave this slide up here for a little bit. And going over the next steps, as I said, observational study data analysis is ongoing. This information and a final report will be shared to Congress as well as being published. Preparations are taking place for all of the bits and pieces of this project reports to be published, and when they are, we'll do our best to make sure that you know where they're published and how you can access them. There's going to be a Move Over Summit in May 9th in Baltimore, Maryland, where we will have the final results at that point, and we'll be able to present all of the final results. And since this is a first of its kind study, there's more activity that needs to take place. We've listed a couple of ideas. It'd be great if there was a periodic check. And this is our frequent request for not only photos, but for videos as well. The more videos we have of incident scenes where we can perform an analysis, the better we're going to be able to get a national representation of what's going on across the country and hopefully bump up some of the numbers that we've got. As noted, a lot of this study and research and literature is focused on work zones and less on traffic incident response. So we'd really like to try and make sure that we've got all weather types, all times of day, and a lot more incidents that we can look at when we're doing the observational study. When everything is published, or if you have any questions about this, please contact Paul. And Paul, with that, I'll turn it right back over to you. Thanks.